Hello, my name's Julian Edgar and I'm the author of this book, Vehicle Aerodynamics, Testing, Modification and Development. And the book's aimed at those with road cars, those developing racing cars, and also those interested in alternative transport. Today's video is why measure aerodynamic pressures. Now, measuring aerodynamic pressures is an incredible window into what is actually occurring aerodynamically with the vehicle, as I'll actually show you in this video. But lots of people don't even know it can be done, let alone done at quite a low price on the road or the track. Let's take a look. So the first thing to be aware of is that the aerodynamic pressure, the pushes or the pulls acting on the car's panels, varies depending on where you are at the car. So here we have a visual where the hotter the colour, the higher the pressure. And let's do an easy one first. If we look here at the front of the car, the air is brought to a near halt. On this particular old-fashioned bluff-fronted car, there is therefore a pressure build-up. And of course that's why you have the radiator at the front of the car. But what's not so obvious, and where the colder colour shows lower pressure, you can see that as the airflow wraps around the leading edge of the bonnet or hood, there's a low pressure. As the airflow wraps around the upper edge of the windscreen and around the A-pillars, there are low pressures, not low pillars, low pressures. And so you can see that air pressures vary all over the car. Now, nearly all drag and nearly all lift or downforce is caused by these pressure variations. So if we can measure these pressures, as we can therefore start working out what effect modifications have on lift or downforce. We can start working out what modifications, the effect of those on drag, all by measuring pressures over the surface of the body. So let's look at this in more detail. So here are the pressures that I measured along the centre line of a Model 3 Tesla. So right down the middle of the car, underneath and on top. A positive pressure means there's a push on the panel, just like we saw a moment ago at the front of that model car. Here we can see on the Tesla, there's a push occurring, plus 210 units. But we can see as the airflow wraps around the leading edge of that bonnet or hood, there's a negative pressure, minus 47, a pull on the panel. Positive at the base of the windscreen, and then look all the way across that lovely curve across the top. Negative pressures, negative pressures, negative pressures, all trying to pull the car up off the ground, creating lift. But helping counterbalance some of that are negative pressures under the car, which means they're pulling downwards, minus 136, minus 72, minus 96. So the lift or downforce of this vehicle can be seen by looking at the average pressures across the top of the car and the average pressures under the car. But I also said that pressures are responsible for most drag. So let's look at this. There's a push on the front of the car at plus 210, which means it's trying to hold the car back. And then there's a pull on the back of the car of minus 41, trying to pull the car back. And so you can see if there's a push on the front and there's a pull on the back, clearly the car will develop drag, as every vehicle does. But by measuring these pressures, we suddenly have a window into what is going on. We don't have to use rules of thumb, like, oh yes, the base of the windscreen's a really high pressure. Well, it's not really high, it's high, but it's not nearly as high as the stagnation pressure at the front of the car. And we can also make modifications, and then by measuring the pressures, see exactly how effective those modifications are. No guesswork. So for example, if we were developing a better diffuser for this car, we could measure the pressure there. The lower the pressure we can get at the diffuser, and in fact all the way on the underfloor, the better. No guesswork. Make changes, measure. Simple as that. So overall lift and downforce can be determined by measuring pressures. Now this is a heavily modified car, model Honda Insight, and the arrows show the directions of the forces created by the pressures. The arrows are always at right angles to the panel, and the length of the arrow is proportional to how strong the pressure is. And so we can see, just as with the Model 3 Tesla, we have low pressures trying to pull the car up over the roof, but under the car we have quite considerable low pressures, especially in this diagram here under the front under tray. Very heavily modified car, remember this one, full under trays, rear diffuser and so on. And so, as I said, we can actually get a feel for lift or downforce by measuring centerline pressures, and more importantly, if we make changes, for example, to increase downforce, we can directly measure the pressure changes resulting from that modification. And if it didn't make any difference, if it didn't make the pressures under the car lower, we know we're going in the wrong direction. Again, no guesswork needed. Measuring of drag, we sort of looked at it theoretically. Here's the pressure at the front, here's the pressure on the back, and I talked about making changes, but here's an example where I was making changes and measuring the pressure, in this case, on the back of the vehicle. So if you look here, you can see there's a foam box cavity has temporarily been put into place. Extensions, which are inset from the sides of the car and extend backwards. And this tube is actually showing me, or showing you, where I was measuring the pressure. If the box cavity was going to reduce drag, there would be an increase in pressure on the back of the vehicle. In other words, the pressure wouldn't be as low. And I'm not going to give away the secret. You read all about it in my book. But this very clearly showed what was occurring by measuring the pressure on the back of the car. And this is only one spot I was measuring. I measured at 3 spots across the back of the car. I could have measured at 6 or 9 spots if I wanted to get even more resolution or more detail. But the key point is, I was able to see by measuring pressures on the back of the car, in the base area, whether that box cavity was working or not. No guesswork, no rules of thumb, no copying what other people are doing, actually making a change and measuring the result. Here's another example of using pressure measurement to determine what's going on. And this is someone who contributed to my book, Xavier Strike. He monitored pressures across the radiator. What was the pressure on the front of the radiator compared with the pressure on the back of the radiator? And the greater that pressure differential, the more airflow you're going to get through your radiator, or oil cooler, or intercooler. It doesn't matter, any heat exchanger. Now, he was measuring the change in pressure by putting on this cardboard under tray. Okay, we know what the pressure drop was across the radiator in standard form. Did this under tray make it better, or did it make it worse? Simple cable tied on, zip tied on, cardboard under tray, and then doing some actual pressure measurement on the road. And this one is a particularly easy pressure measurement to make. You only need the gauge and 2 hoses. You don't even need to use a reference pressure or any of those other things. This is literally 5 minutes to see what the under tray is doing to the pressure difference across the radiator. And some examples from the book. Obviously, I've just given you some page grabs that I'm not going to go into them in huge detail. But here's a Citroën C5. And if we look at the back of the car, in standard form, we can see that the pressures are fairly low. Now, we don't want low pressures on top of the back of the car because that creates lift, as we saw a moment ago. So here we have -12, 0, -7. If we can increase those pressures, we will get less lift at the back of the car. And here's some testing using tufts, and here's some testing using vortex generators, just temporarily stuck on to try and increase the pressure. And here's some examples of the increase in pressure. It went from -12 to +32 at the base of the rear window. But it went from 0 to -7, going the wrong way, the middle of the trunk lid, and -7 to -25, going even further the wrong way. So what did I do about it? I added a temporary plastic spoiler panel on the back of the boot or trunk, and then have a look at the results in terms of pressure. From -12 to +30, from 0 to +38, and best of all, from -7 to +75. The vortex generators, we had 4 of them, and the rear spoiler were working at increasing pressure on that boot lid, reducing lift. No guesswork, actual direct measurement, and doing a series of steps to achieve the right outcome. That's just so radically different from guesswork, rules of thumb, copying what you see someone else doing. And another one, development of a front under tray. Now, again, this is an extract from the book, 2 pages out of about 6 or 8 that covers the development of this. And this was the development of a curved front under tray on my Nissan Note Nismo. Here's a picture showing the, when I find the mouse, here it is. Here's a picture showing the under tray. The photo doesn't actually do justice. It's a beautiful curve to accelerate the air underneath and therefore get downforce. And I was able to take advantage of the raised lip on that standard car's front bumper to direct lots of air down and under the car, under that under tray, and therefore create downforce. Now, how could I be sure it was working? I measured the pressures on the under tray. And the lower I can get those pressures, the more the car is being pulled downwards. And in this case, I was even able to compare the under trays pressures with the standard vehicle that just runs a little lip spoiler. I was able to measure the pressures then and then compare them with what was being achieved by the under tray. No guesswork, direct measurement of what was actually going on. And one more, same car, development of a rear wing. Now, this was an extraordinary development cycle where what I expected to work just didn't work at all. I initially had it's a proper wing, a GOE 222 aluminium aerofoil. I initially had it over the top of the car at the back, but there were some huge problems that pressure measurement showed was being created. So then I moved the wing so it was slightly behind the car. And what I found, yes, it was giving great downforce, but it was also lowering the pressure in the base area behind the car. Look over here. It went from minus 65 standard, then with the wing to minus 93, trying to pull the car backwards, from minus 75 to minus 102, and so on. So drag massively increased. Fuel consumption obviously increased, and I could see why, because the wing, it was working so effectively at pulling air up, it was actually dropping the pressure in the base area of the car. Now, what's the solution? Well, you make the wing electronically adjustable. So you've got two positions, one for fuel economy and one for downforce. Now, measuring the pressures showed me what was going on. I don't think I ever would have come up with a solution that I did come up with if I hadn't been able to measure and see why was drag going up. You know, was it the drag caused by the wing? No, it wasn't. It was the drag caused by the wing acting on the air behind the car. Quite a different thing, isn't it? Now you might be going, oh, well, how do you do all that? Well, you need a gauge. There it is, a lovely Magnahelic gauge, secondhand on eBay, quite cheap. Picking the right gauge is important, covered in detail in the book. You need a front-mounted reference pressure achieved by a little pitot tube. Again, cheaply available on eBay, and again, you need to use the right one. And then you need a pressure measuring patch. This is one that I made, but you can also buy them, and they're probably better than that. The ones that you can buy are cheaper. Not cheaper, they are more expensive, but they're thinner, and that's therefore advantageous. But you can make your own. One person who contributed to the book 3D printed his. I made this from aluminium bar, but you can buy them off the shelf quite cheaply. So you can see you need only a pitot tube, only a gauge, only a pressure measuring patch, and then you too can measure all of these pressures. Now, there's a little bit more to it than that. It's covered in detail in the book. There's a whole chapter on pressure measurement for reasons that now I think must be pretty obvious to you. So the book's called Vehicle Aerodynamics, Testing, Modification and Development. It's available now from Amazon in your country. It is not a cheap book. It is 500 pages, over an inch thick, full colour on every page, and 170,000 words, and all of those things add up to a fairly major printing job, so it's not cheap. But I think the very first time you measure aerodynamic pressures on your car and see the changes that occur with modifications, the book is immediately going to be worth it, because you just don't waste time and money doing things that don't work. You do things that work, and you can measure that they're working. Thank you.